Kei ngā waiwai kai kapua, kei ngā waiwai kai pakiaka, nau mai tahuti mai ki te hui. Ko mihi ngā rangi tēnei, e mihi atu nei ki a koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hui, Māori current affairs for all New Zealanders. E taro ake nei. Tama tū, tama ora, tama noho, tama mate.
Probably would be really sick by the time I was in my 50s, and I probably wouldn't see my 60s.
It's unacceptable at every level, it's shameful.
Māori men have a life expectancy of just 73 years, 7 years less than tauiwi men.
If the intention of the treaty is for Māori to have equal access to things such as health, well then I think we're failing tangata whenua in New Zealand.
So why are Māori men dying younger than other New Zealanders?
Primary care has to change its delivery so that Māori and Pacific get what they're entitled to, good management of an important health condition.
In a special episode, we discuss the inequities and challenges tāne Māori face in our health system. Tahuti mai. Tonight on The Hui we discuss health of tāne Māori, and we have four awesome ones in the whare. They are Director of Health at Te Runanga o Ngāti Whātua, Boyd Paratene, Dr Jordan Te Whaiti Smith from the Medical Research Institute of New Zealand, Immunologist Dr Anthony Jordan, and Chair of the New Zealand Māori Council and heart attack survivor Matt Tukake tēnā koutou. Now, before we begin, let's take a look at some of the leading causes of death for tāne Māori. While life expectancy has increased slightly, Māori men are still dying younger than any other group of New Zealanders. Life expectancy for Māori men is 73 years compared to 80 years for non-Māori males. Cancer is the leading cause of death, with the highest mortality rate at the age of 65 for Māori men. Heart disease is the second leading cause of death, but deaths occur 5 to 15 years earlier among Māori compared with non-Māori. Diabetes is the third leading cause of death. Between the ages of 15 to 30 years, suicide is the leading cause of death for all New Zealand men. And overall, suicide rates among Māori men are double that of non-Māori. Differences in health outcomes for Māori men result from a combination of factors, including greater exposure to the determinants of ill health, such as poverty, poorer access, and quality of health care. Well, it's a pretty bleak picture. Let's start with some of the contributors. Jordan, poverty, quality of care, access to care, where would you start?
Where would you start? It's a pretty bleak picture, Mahi. I guess I'm actually working in obstetrics and gynaecology at the moment, so women's health, funnily enough. And it makes it all too real that actually I think it starts preconception, in utero before you're even thought about really. There's a predetermined pathway for which Māori and tāne Māori specifically, that's what we're talking about tonight, that's the pathway that they follow. And unless we can intervene really, really early on, it's a bleak picture for the rest of the
It's interesting because we talk about birthing babies and the rest of it, and we don't actually talk about tāne Māori. But you must come, you're in the coalface when husbands and partners come along, and you get to kind of interact with them, and they're about to have babies. Yeah. It's
positive in that setting, because they're welcoming a new tamariki into the world. But some of the social situations that you encounter just really, really hit home sometimes.
Solutions, frameworks, ideas. Where do you start? You must see some good ones and some bad ones.
Yeah, I think we see some really positive research happening. There's a Centre of Excellence starting at the University of Auckland called Manaki Manawa, looking at cardiovascular health with an equity lens, specifically focusing on Māori. I think the problem for us, though, is not just what we're doing, but winning back the hearts and minds of our people to re-engage with the health system. Because this isn't about treating disease at the end of the road, it's about promoting, like you said, from that first interaction of well-being throughout life. And that requires a lot of cross-sector engagement to be able to promote health as a focus.
Are we good at capturing the measurement or measuring and not so great at actually putting something into place to combat the results?
And I think that's what we've seen. You know, you can look back at health statistics since we started collecting them, and we've just watched the divergence of health data saying this is getting better for everyone, but Māori are lagging, Māori men are lagging the most. And what have we done? We've just continued to watch something as a natural evolution of something without seeing what are the determinants of this? How can we steer the ship out of these waters to be able to change that discrepancy for Māori men?
Prevention is one of them, and we've got 2 fine 40-something-year-olds in the house. I guess to start with you, Boyd, what do you do, you know, to get on top of your health and when did you start to actually look at prevention?
First of all, I'll just go back a little bit to what's been spoken about earlier, and it's about how not just creating equal access for Māori to the health service, but there needs to be a change in the way that service is delivered as well, because the outcomes are inequitable. We haven't measured what particular amount of bias and resource needs to be dedicated to Māori to achieve making up that difference, and making up that difference between Māori Pākehā isn't the end goal, that's the start. So that we haven't got the right denominators for exactly how much bias we need to apply to Māori health. In response to myself, probably it's really ironic, I've been in charge of a health organisation and we've focused really hard on looking after people. We've had this announcement about the Māori Health Authority. These are all really good things for Māori health, but I see the Māori health sector running itself ragged, trying to fix the Māori Health Authority first of all, get it established, trying to fix the current affairs. A lot of us have neglected our health, probably especially since the lockdown last year. We're chasing our tails. So I'm one of those that's probably neglected a lot of self-neglect, and it's only through my work that we sort of get reminded from our staff to say, hey, we've got this challenge coming up for Māori men for health, and there's these one-off challenges that remind us, oh, this is not what I used to do. When I was young and nice and able to bend my knees without them cracking, we did a lot of stuff, running, league, football. Now I don't do so much of that. It's fishing, walking up hills, so real basic stuff.
So whakapakari tinana and kai.
Whakapakari tinana, whakapakari wairua.
Ka pai. Matt, you've had a couple of big health scares in your life. What do you do, and when did you start looking after yourself?
Well, look, I had my first heart attack a sad day 7 years ago. And also, my dad was 46 when he died, and he had an aneurysm. He had high blood pressure, and even though he was a fantastic squash player, played sports all of his life, he died at 46. I'm now 46 years old. I'm more conscious of my mortality than I ever have been in my entire life. I've struggled with weight over the course of my last 20 years especially. You know, 7 years ago when I had the first heart attack, I pinned my hopes on losing weight, and I dropped that. But then I just reverted to form. And then, you know, at the beginning of the year, I weighed in at 134 kilos. I'm now down to 116 kilos. I guess the value of life today is much more when I had that big scare 7 years ago. Hell, I'm on the salad and the chop chicken and walking the streets. I've got a watch that tells me how many steps I've taken. But for me, I'm probably in that band of Māori males in our middle years who are confronted by going to the GP. We know there's something wrong with us. We know something's not quite right, but there's something inside of us that says, you know, kapai, we'll just wait until we're taken out by the ambulance. And that's a psychology amongst Māori males we really have to change in ourselves.
And these two, working at the coalface, working in health, working at Runanga now, you know, you're on a plenty of boards, so you know, the rest of Māori men, other tāne Māori who don't have the same support or opportunities. When you look at those statistics that we read out at the beginning, you know, what do you put that down to? Is that just blatant racism?
At some level it is, because you're ignoring the reality. So whether or not that's a challenging and confronting thing to hear, when you ignore the reality of something that exists, it is racism.
And what do you make of it?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think we're really, really scared of the big R word, and I don't think we should run away from it, because, you know, like, you just go back to the history books and it tells you right there what the problem is. And even if, you know, patient A who's Māori and patient B who's non-Māori come in and get and come through at the same point in their lives, they get treated differently in the health system, and that is the bottom line, I think.
Because I just wanted to pick up on what you said before, and you talked about that you know the difference in the inequities, but you don't know how to kind of right the unconscious bias. Yeah,
and it's actually really prevalent. So I've got a little bit of self-agency, an experience I had. And when I was young, my father took me to the doctor, and they misdiagnosed my ears. I ended up getting a deaf ear in my left ear. I had the same experience with my son, who's now 11 years old. I took him to the doctors. I said, look, we've got a history of bad glue ear. I've had failing ears since then. It's been misdiagnosed and untreated. Can we get this treated a lot better? They refused to do it, and it was only end of last year. They said to wait.
It's a fight.
Yeah.
We'll come back and talk some more. He paku whakatai, haere ake nei ka hui anō tātou, hei muri i ngā whakatairanga. Auraki mai anō, diabetes is one of the most significant health inequalities experienced by Māori. In fact, Māori between 45 and 64 years of age are 9 times more likely to die from diabetes than non-Māori. Last week I spoke to Ngāti Whātua Public Health Manager Anthony Thompson, who's lost 23 kilos after being diagnosed as pre-diabetic.
In my early 30s I became pre-diabetic. Mum and dad diabetics. Dad passed away 4 years ago of cancer. So, high risk diabetic, high risk cancer. I probably would be really sick by the time I was in my 50s, and I probably wouldn't see my 60s. Pretty grim at the time, and I didn't want to acknowledge that for a little while. But again, you get to a tipping point and you realise, actually, this isn't for me. But that's what it'll be for me, not being around for my whānau, my boy, and the nephews and nieces that I have lots of fun with. My main message is don't be afraid. You're not the only one in this situation. I was really whakamā to begin with and didn't want to acknowledge anything until you start seeing other guys in the same predicament you're in. So I started working out with them. It's those little things that really get you ahead. So my main message is, don't be afraid, don't be whakamā. Once you conquer this, you can conquer everything else.
Tēnā koe te tūngane. We've been talking about conquering up here, and in the break we were talking about just reading those statistics and how actually we feel sad about them. Boyd, you talked about it. Talk me through that. You listen to all those and you're starting to feel a bit like...
Yeah, I do. I read those stats. I read our incarceration stats, and you can be led to believe that we're unhealthy and we just need to be in jail. But the reality is only less than 1% of the male Māori population is in prison. About 70% of us don't smoke. So we need to find out what is helping our people stay out of prison, what is helping them stay smoke-free, and that's where we need to put investment. They invest so much in the prison service. If they invested that same amount in our whānau who report to having mental illness, it would make and year on year, over 100,000 for each person. But they don't. They heavily invest in our prison system rather than our health system. It's embarrassing.
And we talked about, you were talking about you feel like you're living on borrowed time all the time, and I think that you made a comment of we're the only ones who feel like that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm counting down the weeks and the months past the day that my dad, at age 46, passed away. I've even got this motto that I share with everybody to say that, you're a long time dead, so you might as well get a whole lot of stuff done while you're awake, and I shouldn't have to do that. But a lot of it comes down to whether or not the people who are in the health system that I go and seek help from, if I feel comfortable with going and seeing them, or am I being judged for being Māori, for being a Māori male in particular, the judgment, oh, well, you're just not taking care of yourself, or X, Y and Z. But there's little help from the health system in finding preventative ways for us to be healthier, for us to be better. Yes, there is some personal responsibility, I get that, but this is why I have so much hope about the reforms in the health system coming down the line. The Māori Health Authority being stood up. I just hope it's not going to take time for it to wind through, because there's a whole lot of Māori males like me out there that really need less judgment and more support.
Is it common, what you're hearing here?
Totally. And it's disconcerting to hear someone like Matt in his situation, well informed, enabled to make choices, still feeling those things that shouldn't exist in this day and age. Health should be an expectation and a right, not a privilege counting down weeks that he thinks he should have. I can tell you there are tons of patients that aren't Māori that don't think like that. Why do our Māori men think they're on borrowed time?
I don't know. That is a good pathway. I want to pick up on something else that you mentioned, is that, better life choices. That's what people say. What's your response to that? When, sometimes that's what we combat all the time with these bad statistics. Then we're kind of, beaten up again for having them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that argument about, you should just make better choices is just a really, really superficial understanding of actually what feeds into enabling people to make choices. And as I mentioned before, preconception, the choice has already been made for you. So,
you give us some of the ideas around that. I
mean, me, I'm a doctor. I make a good wage. I can get in my car full of petrol. I can get time off work and go and see the doctor. And I can walk in there well informed, knowing my rights, and I can say, hey, this is what's happening with me. This is what I need. Take the example of my father, who is a gang member, grew up in a rural town, doesn't have a lot of money. It's a completely different set of priorities for him than what it is for me, living and breathing, seeing tāne Māori within our health system every day.
So that comes down to access, that comes down to the way he's treated in the health system, and so will that come down to the quality of care as well?
Oh, totally, absolutely.
And I'll talk to you about quality of care, because that's something that we kind of glide over a lot. How important is the quality of care that Māori receive?
It's incredibly important. If you ask someone to come and see you, engage with you, believe what you have to say, change their life often, you've got to make sure that's top-notch care that you're giving them, otherwise they won't come back.
And what about, in the research that you do, when people are diagnosed with something, the quality of drug that or therapy that because that's just a choice, eh?
Yeah, and I think it was last year a really good signal from Pharmac was to take that on board, and in particular around diabetes, funding empagliflozin for Māori at an earlier stage of diabetes, to say we really need something early to help these people because we're not doing things to improve the outcomes by just doing the same things we've always done.
And so when we are getting, not the same quality of care through drugs or therapies and stuff, does it just become the vicious cycle? Matt was talking about he's already on 3 different pills, and when he gets unwell, he's wondering, shall I take another one? Yeah. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, totally. And there's, countless examples of vicious cycles, I think, that are affecting us as Māori. Yeah, going in and getting a pill after, to fix a problem that started from the other pill, it's just, it cascades. And
how do we get Māori men to advocate for themselves?
That's a tough one, but just go back to this question. Also, there's this discussion that happens about the return on investment of a treatment. So are we worth treating because we might not live long enough anyway to see the benefit? That's a horrible discussion, and it should be banished from that medical profession. They should not have that discussion.
Reality?
It doesn't matter if it's a reality because that ends up...
Is that what people are thinking?
Oh, so that's a choice that doctors, they have to weigh up. Is it worth investing our surgery, our medication on this person because of all these other risk factors associated with them? And that's part of the calculation that occurs, and invariably Māori will come out worse from that calculation. What was the other question?
How do we get our people to advocate for
that's
themselves?
A real tough one, but I think we've got a real heap of really good young people that are coming through, and I think it's worth investing a lot of energy. Dr. Anthony was just saying it's probably going to be...
Boys?
My 4 boys, they're little activists, so they're very lucky. They've got a strong Ngāi Tahu mum, they've got a protesting Ngāpuhi koro, who have protested the system, and so that's pretty much what we teach them to do.
Get a Ngāi Tahu mum and a Ngāpuhi koro.
But I think it's about having the language. We need to start teaching the language, the discourse we need to have with our doctors to say, that's not right and I want better.
Ka pai. We're going to come back for part 3 and have another kōrero e whaeke nei ka matapakihia ngā take hauora hine ngaro, nō reira kia mai tonu mai rā. Auraki mai anō. Tāne Māori are twice as likely as non-Māori males to report a high probability of having an anxiety or depressive disorder, and rates of suicide remain at unacceptably high levels. Māori are underserved by the mental health system, so could the new Māori Health Authority be the answer? Matt?
Oh, look, I think it's one of the answers. I mean, I've been a fierce advocate of suicide prevention and mental health for I don't know how many years now. Again, off a lived experience of losing my best mate, searching for the perennial answer to the question. We have a deep-seated problem with mental health in this country. The statistics don't lie, it bears it out. I think during COVID-19 it's been amplified even further. We've got a lot of anxious people out there, particularly Māori, Māori losing their jobs, so on and so forth. So there is a great hope with the Māori Health Authority. You know, it's got to be a bold and brave government that says we're going to take this kaupapa and we're going to see if we can get this stood up within this term of government and get some trains moving away from the station. But we can't be, you know, devoid of the task ahead. It's going to be a big, big task. Just coming back to one point, if I may, and that is about our own whakapapa, because it plays into this as well. I really want to see more doctors in the health system understand better my health whakapapa, not just mine from when I was born to how old I am now, but what are the things that have gone on in my family history that might provide markers for my future health and well-being. I mean, so for example, heart attacks, high blood pressure, cholesterol, all of that sort of thing. It is writ large in the male side of my whānau. So I want them to better understand me. Instead of judging me, ask me those questions so we can better understand together what needs to happen. But also mental health plays a role in this too. I mean, mental health just doesn't appear in a whānau overnight. It is often something that's symptomatic of the broader whānau group. And so what more could we learn from that as well? So I have great hopes.
It's a big issue even tonight. I've been listening to it on the news because, you know, there's, I don't know if it's an underspend, but they promise, you know, over $1 billion for mental health. Are you seeing it where you're working? I'm
seeing the underspend, yeah. I'm seeing... Basically, there's a lack of investment. If you go to prison, you automatically get $99,000 per year spent on you. If you show up with a mental health problem, a Māori, middle-aged Māori man show up to the doctors, you can get 3 free clinics appointments with a psychologist if that's what you need, or a counsellor. 3. That's nowhere near the cost of $99,000 per year. So we don't invest in that issue, and it's a potentially life-saving solution is to give them actual more. If people turn up with these mental health issues, treat them, look after them, make them better. And also what's happening is we're not inviting our 18 to 24-year-olds. They don't go to hospitals, doctors, they don't get any of their physical or mental health check because they think they're bulletproof. That funding's not spent on them. Clinics hold on to that funding and make a profit. Meanwhile, our people turn up at 30 broken. Broken, and there's a hell of a lot more investment needed.
Solutions.
You know, there are so many good ideas out there waiting for a bit of funding and time to be given to it. And like Matt said, the Māori Health Authority is our chance to really put our footprint in the sand to say, we're going to make a go of this. Because it may not come around again. This is our time to take ownership of our own health, our own vision of what we need to be lived well-being as a people. Otherwise, they will just consign it again, like the other terrible statistics and crime, and say that's what they've got.
And so you have some. You said earlier that, you know, you're concerned that it's not going to just roll out like you thought it was. There's going to be some doorstops. What are those? What are some of the concerns you have?
Some of my concerns is that we don't see this as an opportunity to deliver for our people. We end up worrying about jockeying for position, getting to places of power, holding power, and losing sight of what's really the goal here, well-being.
You are feeling aspirational about it. Share with us, young 20-something-year-old.
I mean, I think the Māori Health Authority in its essence is an amazing step. Like, you know, I was just saying 5 years ago, this would have just, you know, it was like a twinkle in somebody's eye. But now it's, you know, they've pledged that it's happening. But we've got a current health system that's horrifically underfunded. We've got nurses going on strike. Those are the people that, you know, are in hospitals 24/7 taking care of our whānau, and they can't even fund that properly and come to the table and properly say, look, let's give our nurses the money that they actually deserve because they do a hard job. So, you know, I think a Māori Health Authority is going to be awesome, but it's resource. You need the resource.
You're on the floor working with other and even non-Māori doctors and nurses and the rest, but what are they thinking about the Māori Health Authority?
I haven't actually heard too much about it, apart from that it's, you know, it's going to be a good step towards righting the wrongs. But, you know, at this point we kind of don't know how it's going to, you know, what the nitty-gritty is going to look like, what the structure is going to look like, and, you know, if it's really going to be independent.
But like I say, that's the point though. What we need to do is we need to see trains moving from stations now. So it's all good and wonderful to stand up the Māori Health Authority, big fan of it, kapai that. But we have hauora right across the country now that are struggling for funding and resources. We have nurses that are working for these hauora that are paid at least up to sometimes 30% less than their counterparts working for a DHB. We have a mental health system that, let's face it, is in crisis, but all of this we can start investing now while we stand this thing up. Because, you know, Andy's right, we're jockeying for positions to be on boards and all this other sort of nonsense. Well, that can happen, you know, let somebody over there take care of it. But meanwhile, the only focus must be the health of our people, and we shouldn't wait for a year or 2 years before this is stood up to get that happening now.
And one of those issues which is dear to us also is mental health, and you were talking about the cost of, you know, 3 appointments, and if you hear what Mike King says from Gumboot Friday, that's literally less than $500 if he was to do it. Is that a solution? Should they be rolling money into those kind of kaupapa?
From my perspective, there's a lot of solutions out there that we can be investing now. I mean, $1 billion is a lot of money. I mean, we can do a lot of money with $10 million. I mean, you should see the work that Māori organisations do. It's incredible. So there's a lot of things that can be invested in now. I think what we do is we struggle with how these things are being procured, and that is generally an issue for government to address, Ministry of Health to address, social development agencies to address. But Mike's got a really big and important point. The problem hasn't gone away. It's been here for a long time. This is intergenerational. And when are we going to stop talking about doing something and act on doing something? And that's his point.
We need you all at the table for this kōrero. Thank you so much for all your time and your whakaaro tonight. Ko hikina te hui e hoa mā ka nui te mihi ki aku manuhiri tuarangi I tēnei pō. Nohoro mai rā. The Hui is made with support from New Zealand On Air.